License? Registration? Or just some clever story you're about to make up, old-timer? The younger officer circled a dusty, dented pickup, sneering as he tossed the words like a challenge. His partner snickered, eyeing the rusted body, panels with smug amusement. Inside the cab, the man behind the wheel didn't flinch. He didn't argue, didn't even glance their way. Both hands remained on the steering wheel, firm, weathered, unmoving. Exactly 61 minutes later, a black government SUV glided to the curb, its arrival slicing through the lazy afternoon like a blade. A man in full four-star general regalia emerged, not bothering with formalities. He raised his hand and delivered 6 crisp, icy words. "That man trained me at Fort Drake." Earlier that day, 82-year-old Walter Dean was making his way home, after picking up supplies from Barton's Hardware. His old Chevy, a clunky but loyal beast he'd rebuilt more times than he could count, creaked along the back roads of his town. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, and a sun-bleached army cap embroidered with Special Ops, U.S. Army. No one usually noticed Walter. That's how he preferred it. He wasn't running errands for himself. He'd been fixing a wheelchair ramp for a widow down the block, something he'd done countless times for neighbors without ever asking a dime. But barely a mile from home, flashing lights interrupted his peaceful ride. Without fuss, he pulled over, placed his palms on the wheel, and waited. The officers swaggered up. One tapped the hood. "Where are the tags, sir? This rig even street legal?" His partner leaned in, pretending to inspect the worn dashboard. "Bet it's stolen or junked. What do you say, Gramps?" "It's been mine since 1969, Walter answered calmly, voice soft but unwavering. "Got ID?" one demanded. Walter handed it over without a word. They snorted in disbelief. "Retired Army, huh? Right." They yanked the door open, pulling him from the truck with exaggerated authority. "You running moonshine, old man?" one joked, nudging the rear bumper with his boot. Walter didn't respond. His silence wasn't weakness. It was control. He'd learned long ago that restraint could be more powerful than any threat, as the officers poked around the bed of the truck. They passed glances and chuckles over the stack of plywood and screws. "What's all this? Building a bunker?" "Ramp materials," Walter said. "For Mrs. Danvers. She can't walk well." They didn't believe him. But his hands, scarred and calloused, told a different story. Those hands had constructed shelters in flooded towns, rebuilt broken barracks in hostile zones, and patched up half of his neighborhood more than once. Each splinter embedded in his skin was a testament to a life spent serving, in and out of uniform. When they ordered him to empty his pockets, he did so slowly. Keys, wallet, a worn photograph. A small notebook, its edges frayed from years of being carried. Inside, names were scrawled in tight, deliberate handwriting. Some names were underlined, others were crossed out. "What's this?" An officer scoffed, flipping through the pages. "Secret codes?" "They're men I served with," Walter replied. The notebook was tossed to the ground like trash. One officer clicked his tongue. "Truck's not roadworthy, definitely not legal." Walter bent, retrieved the notebook with deliberate care, and tucked it back in his chest pocket like it was scripture. He didn't mention the antique plate designation that legally exempted his truck. He didn't argue. He just stood there, spine straight, waiting. They made him sit on the curb. Passers-by slowed down. Phones came out. Someone muttered, "Guy's not cooperating." Another added, "Might be unstable." They radioed in, "Possible stolen vehicle, elderly male acting, erratic." In Walter's shirt pocket was a folded letter, retirement commendation from the Joint Chiefs. In his glove compartment sat a photo of his unit in the mountains of Kashmir and a bronze star tucked behind it. "Protocol," they told him. "Just routine." He didn't speak. After half an hour, one of the officers growled, "Bet this guy thinks he's some kind of war hero." A teenager stopped, snapped a selfie with Walter in the background, and posted it online with the caption, "LOL Grandpa's getting arrested." The younger cop cracked a joke about meds. Bet he doesn't even remember who he is. Walter remained quiet. Not from confusion, but because he'd faced trained interrogators in cellars overseas who were far more terrifying than these two. Inside the nearby gas station, a clerk named Pete, an Iraq war vet, recognized Walter immediately. He picked up the phone. "Colonel Grant? It's Pete. You're not going to believe who's being detained right now." 40 more minutes crawled by. The officers leaned against their car, sipping coffee. One sat on Walter's hood. Then the wind changed, the sea. Black SUV rolled into view, low, powerful, deliberate. It stopped directly behind the cruiser. Both cops stood up, unsure of what to expect. The back door opened. A tall man in dress blues stepped out, 4 stars glinting in the sun. No hesitation, no pretense. "Which one of you detained this man?" the general asked coldly. Walter sat calmly, barely moving, shadow cast long in the afternoon light. He didn't blink. He didn't rise, just waited. Across the street, a few townspeople gathered, whispering, squinting at the scene. Many still assumed Walter was just another cranky old man causing a fuss. None saw the discipline in his breathing, or the trained stillness in his posture, the kind only decades of combat could instill. One of the officers glanced at his partner. "Think we need backup?" "No idea who this guy even is," the other muttered. "You should," said a woman stepping forward. "That's Walter Dean. He builds ramps for the disabled, never charges. Everyone here knows him." "Ma'am, we're handling it," one cop shot back, dismissive. "Please step away." "But he's a hero. Return to your vehicle." She did, but not quietly. Walter's knees ached from the sidewalk, but he didn't show it. He'd crawled through jungles, endured fevers, carried men twice his size through swamps. A little concrete wasn't going to break him. Pete, the gas station clerk, watched from his window and muttered, "They really don't know who they're messing with." The general stepped forward. "I trained under this man. He led survival. Missions before half of today's army was even born. He's a living legacy." The 2 officers stood frozen, clipboards in hand. They hadn't run into a suspect. They'd disrespected a legend. The air grew still as the general's aide stepped forward, leather portfolio in hand, embossed with the seal of the United States government. He took position beside his superior, silent but firm, while the growing crowd watched in stunned silence. Cell phones came out. Recording lights blinked. Across the street, a woman whispered, "That's him. The guy who helped my mom after her stroke." One of the officers tried to recover, clearing his throat. "We were just following vehicle protocol, sir. No tags." "Protocol?" the general snapped. "Do you even know who wrote most of the protocols your department follows for nighttime?" "Extractions?" The officers fell silent. "That man," he continued, pointing toward Walter, "developed operational strategies still used by elite teams today. You think this is just an old man with a beat-up truck? That vehicle delivered medical aid through hurricane zones. It survived war zones. And so has he." Walter stayed seated, only the subtle lift in his chin acknowledging the words. From the edge of the crowd, another voice spoke up. "He built my brother's ramp after his leg was amputated. Helped train my cousin for ranger school. He volunteers every week at the Veteran Center," someone else added. By now, over 50 people had gathered. The social media posts were exploding. "Decorated vet humiliated by local cops" was already trending. The younger officer's face turned red. He stepped forward, trying to apologize. "Sir, I didn't realize." Walter finally stood, slowly, on his own. His voice, low but clear, cut through the awkward silence. "That's the problem, son. You don't ask. You assume." The general turned toward the crowd and raised his voice. "Sergeant Major Dean here led missions that saved American lives across 3 continents. He came out of retirement after 9/11 to train special forces in survival operations. His techniques saved lives in operations that will remain classified until most of us are long gone." The aide opened the portfolio and handed the senior officer a file. "This is his publicly available service record. You may want to read it." A nurse stepped forward from the gas station, still wearing her scrubs. "Mr. Dean gave blood at our clinic every single month for 30 years. Never missed an appointment." The officers shifted awkwardly. Their confidence had drained out, like air from a tire. The general continued. "This truck, as rusted as it looks, is designated as a historical vehicle by the Department of Defense. You'd know that if your department cross-referenced its registry. But you didn't." Walter finally spoke again, voice calm but firm. "They were doing what they thought was right. Can't fault someone for following orders. But I've seen where blind obedience without understanding leads, and it's never anywhere good." The general nodded. "Still teaching, Sergeant Major?" Walter gave a thin smile. "Until the last breath, sir." That day, the county sheriff's department issued a formal apology. A video of the general's confrontation and Walter's quiet dignity amassed millions of views within days. The mayor declared July 14th, Walter Dean Day, in honor of his contributions. Donations came flooding in, nearly $250,000 in just over a week. Walter redirected every penny to building accessibility ramps for veterans nationwide. The Dean Initiative was born with a waiting list of homes already signed up for help. At the very street corner where he'd been forced to sit like a suspect, a bronze plaque was later installed. It read, "True service never rests. Walter Dean, U.S. Army." Walter continued to drive that same truck, still picked up lumber, still built ramps. But now, folks didn't just see an old man in a noisy pickup. They saw a legacy. Kids waved. Officers saluted. No one tapped the hood anymore. A few weeks later, the younger officer, Brian Keller, showed up at Walter's place, hat in hand. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't just misjudge you. I misunderstood the whole idea of service." Walter poured him a cup of coffee and gestured to the porch. "You learn from it, or someone else pays the price." That conversation stuck with Brian. He began showing up at the local VFW on weekends. At first, the vets gave him cold looks. He was the guy who humiliated one of their own. But Walter's quiet endorsement opened doors. Eventually, Brian earned a seat at the card table and started helping fix up the old building. One night, as they were repairing a leak in the VFW roof, Walter asked him, "Why'd you really come back, son?" Brian hesitated, then replied, "Because 4 years in the force, and I never once stepped foot in this place. I swore to protect people, and didn't even know them." The sheriff took note of everything. Soon, a new department-wide training initiative launched, Veteran Recognition and Respect. Walter reluctantly agreed to speak at the first session. He stood before a room full of rookies and said only one thing: service doesn't end with the uniform, and neither should the respect. 3 months later, General Grant returned, not in full dress this time, but in jeans and boots. He sat beside Walter on his porch. They drank whiskey and watched the fireflies flicker across the yard. "You changed everything, old friend," the general said. Walter chuckled, shaking his head. "No, they changed themselves. I just held up the mirror." Today, Walter's truck still rumbles through Main Street. It still carries lumber, sometimes groceries, and sometimes, when a forgotten veteran passes with no family left, that truck carries a flag-draped casket to its final resting place. And every single time, the police cruisers don't stop it anymore. They pull over, and they salute. At the local police academy, new recruits are handed a laminated card during orientation. On it are 6 simple words. You never know who you're stopping,